work on a film that was released in 1991 called Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And I told you I sat there gushing because Robin Hood in 1991, I still remember it so clearly. I was working at a video store during that time, and I went to the movie theater with my friend. We sat in the front row because it was almost sold out, so we had to sit in the very front, and with our necks cranked up, and we watched it. And I don't know if it was the reason that we felt like we were inside of it because we were so close to the screen, or if it was just that impactful to that high school kid. But when we walked out of the theater, we went right back in and watched it again within 20 minutes. And I could count on how many times I've done that in my hand. That's how wonderful of an adventure it was for us. And it was it's one of my favorite films of that era. Can you tell me, how did you wrote Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and you're also a producer on it. How did this whole thing come to be? Because Robin Hood is one of those, every decade or two, they just redo a Robin Hood, and I don't know, before the Kevin Costner one, when was the last Robin Hood? Like prior to that?
Probably Disney, the animated one.
Yeah. God, geez. So that we're talking about like 30 years prior to that. And then Flynn was prior to that. And I remember that there was
Fairbanks was before that.
And
a couple of others, but
I do remember that there was a TV movie that came around that was trying to just jump on that Robin Hood bandwagon. I remember very clearly, and they tried to release it as because I worked at the video store, so I remember watching.
Oh yes, right.
So I remember watching that video.
There's a story behind that too. Yeah. Okay, well, if I get boring, cut me off and just say get to the end.
Okay, sure.
We've been very successful in Hollywood working with people like Stallone, who had asked us to fix things in his films as consultants, because our own hands-on way with film was very successful for getting problems resolved. We worked outside of the definition of just a script. So we had access to people, which was very cool, but we also looked at what we were also doing was, in Canada, we chose to pursue things that excited us. Having had the privilege of having my wife, I looked at, what do I want to say? And I'm looking at Stallone making movies about killing lots of people, and Schwarzenegger making Commando, where human beings are just targets. And I'm looking at us raising this kid and putting all this energy in and going, what an enormous amount of love and effort it takes to raise a child. And here you are using them as target practices. What would I like to say? And I came up with this idea of putting a Muslim and a Christian side by side in a Robin Hood, which would show two people of different who are supposed to be enemies actually learning from each other. And I also came up with this idea of what I called the makers of life versus the takers of life, which was, if you had a hero, and it could be a heroine, who's willing to die for the future of someone else, that's like and we did Backdraft, which is like a fireman who's willing to die so that he gives other people a future. That's a maker of life. That's an altruistic hero. Whereas a taker of life is someone who puts their foot on a hot, dead corpse and thinks I've done something wonderful. So I went out and pitched a Robin Hood that was about a lesson hidden inside an adventure, because I'd grown up on Robin Hood. I'd grown up on the TV show, just like you watched ours, and came away with my heart full and jumping off rocks with a sword in my hand. And I went to 3 different studios and pitched the Robin Hood idea I had, which was to take it and make it an adventure, but with this idea of putting a Muslim with him. And the 3 all said pretty much the same thing. No one wants to see guys with swords. All they want to see is guys with guns. You're wasting your time. And I was about to give up. There was a thought that I was also off course by trying to put an Arab in Robin Hood. That didn't look good to a couple of people I knew. And we had an assistant who was working with us called Mark Stern. And Mark sort of looked at my notes and said, you know what? I think it's a great idea. If you start, I'll try and help you. And so the only reason Robin Hood exists is because that guy gave me enough encouragement to blow on the embers of something that I'd almost given up on. And I started writing. And every day I looked at what I was writing, because I wrote just passionately, not with any plan, just to see what would come out of me. And every day I looked at my pages and thought they were obvious and silly, and Maid Marian comes out and she's very large, and and Robin is shocked and looks up at her on the balcony and says, "Oh my, the years have been kind to you." And then suddenly he's jumped by a person in leathers, and that turns out to be made, and that seems so obvious to me. And my assistant is, no, no, no. And then he's giving the pages to John Watson, who's reading them and going, no, no, keep going, Penn. So I got encouraged to keep taking risks. And we ended up that the film, I got the script out of me in 3 weeks. But it also, then I gave it to John to go through it and format it and add any ideas and any adventures. And so it had his layer on it. And then as it got shot, different people added other elements. And we ended up with a rich, funny, warm script that was the seeds of what I created and the energy of what I created. And for me, I was making a movie where you taught people a lesson about altruism, where you took the richest, most spoiled, obnoxious lord's son, and he had told his dad to go screw himself. He was going off to fight, and his father's begging him not to try and force a man to another man's religion. And he comes home, sees his father's dead, and takes his anger by making his peasants go out and fight the sheriff. And then realize that all he's doing is destroying their lives. And then he has an epiphany, and he's willing to die for their children's future. And we put a birth scene in the movie. And the birth scene is metaphorically my son being born. And Robin Hood it is both an adventure, but it's also a philosophical statement of life for me. And I couldn't give up on it. And so John took on the challenge of, he was what I call up to his ass in mud and arrows most of the time, because he's a great on-set producer, and I'm more a philosopher producer. So I was working on changes and writing things, and whereas he was really taking the brunt of getting a 100-day shoot. But the movie itself grew as each element came to it, and Michael Kamen's score was just extraordinary. I also got to run the mix, and I am very much about, when you create a movie, you're weaving a dream. And the goal is never to let your audience wake up. It's like blowing up a balloon. You must never let the air out. And so in a mix, I worry about every facet of it. Can I pre-lap a sound coming in from the next scene so there's no pause? But you're not conscious of it. If there's a pause in the dialogues that's empty, can I put birds flying from the trees so that your ear is tuned without it knowing that you didn't actually hear some dialogue? So I'm also excited in that process of keeping a trance, which is don't let the audience wake up. And so when you mix a movie, which is the most beautiful part of a movie, because it's like a Frankenstein, you're putting new blood in it, and it comes to life. To me, every aspect of making a film is vital. It's costumes tell a story, sound effects tell a story. They have character, and distribution, even the title. Your title sets up a trance state, an induction. I studied hypnosis. So there's a thing, it's just inducing people, and inducing people makes them want to go with you into the dream state. And what is it? I think Hollywood is called the dream factory, because truly stories work on our dream centers. Like we have receptors in us. And that was what Marshall McLuhan taught me all those years ago, saying, look at an audience watching a movie, and you'll see they're in a trance, and they're moving their faces with the characters on the screen. And years later, I found research that said the reason that that's happening, which is fascinating to me, is that we have a social structure in us, which is the ability to sense and feel empathy with others. And the way it works is that we are hardwired to our pain centers, and we micro-mimic the expressions of others as we watch them. And then we feel what they feel. And if you Botox yourself, you don't feel as much and you don't send as much, right, which is fascinating. And we have these things called mirror neurons, which are in us, which light up in the parts of our brain when we watch somebody do something, or even when we read a book about somebody doing something, those same parts of our brain light up as what the character's doing in the book. So that's why I come back to this trance state. The purpose of a story, which is the thing that most people don't understand, is to teach us a lesson about ourselves. so that we can actually watch the struggles of the characters and make choices about our own lives and the things we struggle with based on making a decision having observed others struggle. It comes back to, if you have a hero in a movie, Superman is invulnerable. If he doesn't have a problem, there's nothing to learn from. So, and the real purpose of films is to find what the character's flaw is, what their difficulty is, and illustrate it through the external story of getting the adventure out. But inside is the actual journey, and it's usually only like 3 steps. I'm a spoiled rich brat. I then have a tantrum, which causes more problems, and then I come to learn who I should be if I was not spoiled and take responsibility for myself. That's Robin Hood.
No, and
So,
and the way you've explained it now, knowing the movie so well as I do, is just adds a whole other layer to it. You should have done the director's commentary or a commentary, producer's commentary, writer's commentary on the DVD track back in the day, because it does open up a completely.
but it, again, it's different things get to a writing audience. I'll talk about these things. It's nutrition. An enormous number of stories don't have nutrition. And nutrition is that you've got a personal journey that you can relate to, that you can discover how to change yourself because of watching these people struggle. And I came up with a system inside our company because we developed hundreds of stories where I came up with code words called a nugget. And a nugget for us is the seed inside the story that's going to grow in the brain of the person watching it. And an example would be a man is getting married and his girlfriend is starting to feel, the closer to the date, the more he's sort of like living in her world, and she's feeling that she's being suffocated because everything she's doing, he's there and he's not letting her have a sense of her own freedom. And she calls off the wedding and she says to him, I can't do this. And, you're not letting me be me. And he says, you don't understand. My mother left the family on Christmas Eve when I was 5 years old, and I didn't know how to love her enough so she would stay with us. And she says, I'm not your mother. You have to trust me. You have to give me my freedom. That's a nugget. And it's 3 lines of dialogue, but it's got such pain and damage in it. And the story is, can he let go of his old fears and trust this woman to be the one he wants her to be? And can he be the person he would have been if that damage had never happened to him? So once you look at the story and you say, okay, can I define those things? My rule is you write stories any way you can.
Mm-hmm.
Then you look for these things and see if you can emphasize them. And usually this piece of information is discussed at the belly of the beast, as Joseph Campbell says, when the characters crash and burn at the end of the second act and all looks hopeless, they do a reassessment of who they are. And a character who has an influence on them will suggest something or will change their perspective on themselves. And the last act is, can they become who they really should be? And we then learn about ourselves, letting go of our own failings, damages, and using strategies to have a better position in life.
Yes, to everything you just said, yes. It's amazing. I'm just sitting here just listening to you, and I'm just like, I feel like I'm just sitting here like around a campfire right now talking to you as you explain these things the way you do. You have a very hypnotic tone to you, Ben.
Right.
You have your voice is very hypnotic in a very good way.
I think I'm right for everybody, because there's going to be people that do things absolutely different from anything I could imagine.
Oh no, no question.
And I say, Einstein said, it's not that I'm smarter than other people, I just stay up think longer. And I have the privilege of doing so many stories and trying to make that process simpler and make it effective. And I'm a humanist, so I want my stories to reach out. And I believe storytellers are basically what shaman would have been around that campfire, which is to help the society pull together.